great TV never gets old.
Now on Chronicle, South Carolina from above.
And around the world, a lot of people's favorite beach is in South Carolina.
A view that gives you a new perspective of life in the Palmetto State.
You notice very quickly from the air is the green and the water.
A rich history.
The historical significance that South Carolina plays in the founding of this country.
Breathtaking beauty.
To have the beautiful multiple chain of lakes is such a visual high.
And the things that make this state special.
It's a wonderful state with a wonderful community.
One of the most beautiful places in the world to call home.
Now on Chronicle, South Carolina from above.
Welcome to Chronicle. I'm Jane Robelow. I'm standing on top of Glassy Mountain in northern Greenville County at the Cliffs at Glassy community, just a few miles from the North Carolina line. The vista here in the southeast corner of the Blue Ridge Mountains is spectacular, and it goes on for miles and miles. South Carolina is a beautiful state, from the mountains and the foothills in the upstate, to the sandhills of the Midlands, to the beaches and the barrier islands and the Grand Strand and the Low Country. Over the next hour, we plan to explore our state as we take to the sky to give you a unique, high-definition view of South Carolina from above. So get ready for a look at the Palmetto State from a viewpoint you've likely never experienced. The beauty of South Carolina, from mountains to sea, bounded on the north by North Carolina, Georgia on the west and southwest, and on the east and southeast by the Atlantic Ocean. It's not a large state. The Palmetto State ranks 40th in size. It's only a little over 200 miles from north to south and less than 300 east to west. But while 40th in size, South Carolina's almost 5 million residents rank it 23rd in population.
South Carolina, quite frankly, from the mountains to the coast, is one of the most beautiful terrains and places that you could visit or see. And it's amazing to me to have folks come from around the country and around the world that really just remark about the beauty of South Carolina.
The geographic diversity of the state gives us a home that has a little something for everyone.
Sometimes we live here, we take it for granted. We ride by those trees and by that lake every day on the way to work. But folks from around the world recognize very quickly that this is the one of the most beautiful places in the world to call home.
The 187 miles of coastline means the Grand Strand beaches on the northern coast are popular family destinations for visitors from many states. There are more than 100 golf courses in the area that likes to say it's the golf capital of the world. And if working all of the clubs in your golf bag is just too much of a challenge, you can putt your way to happiness on one of the dozens of miniature golf courses along the Grand Strand.
And then obviously the historical significance that South Carolina plays in the founding of this country.
We pass Charleston, the first home of state government, where the Civil War began, a city steeped in history. That history and choice have led to a low skyline, a skyline marked by numerous tall church steeples that contributed to Charleston being called the Holy City.
Charleston's history with the Civil War, the beautiful antebellum homes, the beautiful colonial churches, all of it combined has created a very strong tourism industry in the city of Charleston and has resulted in the city of Charleston being named the #1 city in America by multiple different media outlets.
South Carolina's Low Country is marked by a network of sea islands that are also popular with visitors. The largest is Hilton Head Island, home to Harbor Town, where PGA pros compete each year in the RBC Heritage Tournament in the springtime. Hilton Head, with its many resorts and restaurants, is the largest island on the Atlantic seaboard between New Jersey and Florida. As we leave the coast behind, we can see the heartbeat of the state as we pass farms, lakes, numerous towns and cities, and industrial plants, all of which provide jobs for state residents.
The Midlands of South Carolina a lot of times gets overlooked because we have, the upstate, which has the mountains and some beauty, and then we have the coastal area, which obviously has the beaches and a lot of wetlands. Really in the Midlands, if you drive around and you look at the forest and you look at the lakes that exist around here, the Midlands of South Carolina sometimes gets overlooked, but the rivers that move from the upstate down to the coast run through the Midlands, and they continue to provide a lot of beauty and really recreational opportunities with our parks, our state parks.
Along the plains of the Midlands, the state capital appears, Columbia, home to state government, one of the state's two major universities, the University of South Carolina, and one of the Army's largest bases focused on basic training of soldiers. About 100 miles north of Columbia lies the upstate, home to 4 large cities: Greenville, Spartanburg, Anderson, and Rock Hill, a corridor connected by Interstate 85. Home to dozens of plants, including BMW and Michelin. To the west, near Lake Hartwell, is the state's other large university, Clemson. All of this lies in the foothills of the mountains that separate South and North Carolina. The state's highest point is Sassafras Mountain in northern Pickens County at just over 3,500 feet.
The state really is a remarkable place to call home, and a lot of that's because of the beauty that we live amongst.
This is South Carolina, but only a little of what's still ahead. A look back at the state's rich and sometimes controversial history, when Chronicle South Carolina from Above continues.
Home is
Europeans first visited what is now South Carolina almost 500 years ago, when the Spaniard Hernando de Soto first explored the area. But it was 123 years later when King Charles II of England granted a royal charter to 8 men, the Lords Proprietors, for the area known as Carolina. The first settlement was just northwest of the present city of Charleston.
They stayed there for about 10 years. After 10 years, they abandoned that site and then actually went to the site of modern-day Charleston. The famous philosopher John Locke and his patron, Anthony Ashley Cooper, actually designed a city for Charleston, and even today, the Charleston Peninsula sits at the confluence of the Ashley and the Cooper rivers.
Charleston remained the center of commerce and government until settlements moved further inland.
The first capital of South Carolina was Charleston. And several years after the end of the American Revolution, the South Carolina Assembly, noticing that there had been significant settlement in the interior of the new state, decided to move the capital to a more geographically centralized location. So they voted to move it to a spot in the Midlands. And the legislature voted on what they wanted to call our new capital. One senator suggested Washington, but Columbia, named after Christopher Columbus, actually won out. And Columbia became one of our nation's first planned cities.
And then came settlement of the Upcountry, an area originally home to Native Americans.
In the 1800s, however, seeking cooler temperatures, fewer mosquitoes, less disease, less humidity, wealthy low-country planters and other civic leaders such as Henry Middleton and also Joel Poinsett began to establish homes in the rolling foothills and in the mineral springs of the upcountry. And of course, they named it the upcountry in contrast to their homes in the low country.
Evidence of that time remains. This is the Poinsett Bridge, built in 1820, and named for statesman Joel Poinsett. It was originally part of the Old State Road, a passage from the Low Country through Columbia into the mountains of North Carolina. Just a few miles to the west in Oconee County lies the Stump House Tunnel. Planned in the 1830s, with construction beginning in the 1850s, the plan was to provide a railway passage from Charleston to Knoxville. By the beginning of the Civil War, the expensive project was stopped. Now, the tunnel and nearby Issaquena Falls draw visitors to the northwest corner of the state. When the colonies declared their independence in 1776, there were skirmishes and battles across the state. But it was a battle in the upcountry that's remembered as a turning point as the fighting moved toward Yorktown. The Battle of Cowpens on January 17, 1781, pitted an American force under the command of Daniel Morgan against the British. The Americans took the victory. Morgan is remembered in nearby Spartanburg, where a statue erected in his honor has long been a part of an area known as Morgan Square in the heart of downtown. 80 years after Cowpens, war was again fought on state soil. After years of building tension, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union, and ultimately, the first shots of the upcoming Civil War were fired in Charleston Harbor.
In April of 1861, Union troops still occupied Fort Sumter off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. Lincoln vacillated between how to handle the situation. The troops in the fort needed to be resupplied. They were running out of food, but he also knew what could happen should he send reinforcement down into now the Confederacy. He warned Confederate officials that he was going to send a boat carrying reinforcements down. And on the morning of April 12th, very early in the morning, Confederates fired upon Fort Sumter. When I envision Fort Sumter, I think of Charlestonians walking out on their verandas and going up to their roofs and literally watching the bombardment of the fort as spectacle, as entertainment. Also at that point in time, the loudest sound that most Americans had ever heard was thunder. The bombardment of Fort Sumter eclipsed the decibel volume of thunder. It was the loudest thing that these people had ever heard in their lifetimes.
Among the battle sites that remain in Charleston, Morris Island, where the 54th Massachusetts conducted the assault on Confederate Battery Wagner, immortalized in the movie Glory. The lighthouse, now surrounded by water, a reminder of that time.
Well, Morris Island is significant during the Civil War. It's significant in the Revolutionary War. All of those barrier islands are very important as a foothold to get into Charleston, so you have to get past those. And if you've got a lighthouse there, if you're on an enemy ship and you're trying to get through, you want to know where that lighthouse is. So if you're trying to have people not get into Charleston, you can turn that lighthouse off, and they'll have a really hard time navigating. So it was very important, and it is amazing that it's still there. So we want to take care of it as long as we can. Eventually the sea will reclaim it.
It may not be as well known as the burning of Atlanta, but South Carolina's capital suffered significant damage as General William Tecumseh Sherman's Union forces shelled the city, and portions of the city burned.
So Sherman gets to Columbia, and he is on a breakneck, amazing speed through the state, and he gets here and he just kind of gets through it. So he doesn't stop here for a whole lot of time. His job is to make sure that Columbia does not supply the Confederacy with anything else anymore. So he comes through on a mission to really cripple the city, and that's what happens. And there's a lot of quibbling over the details of how that happens. Sherman was here to make a mess in Columbia, and a mess was made.
The current state capitol building was under construction when Sherman and his troops came through. Visitors today can see stars where shells struck the building.
And those stars indicate where shells from Sherman's army landed on what was then just the beginning structure of the Capitol building. And in fact, the Capitol was supposed to be a much grander building, but because of the economic fallout after the Civil War, they built it a little bit less grand than was originally planned.
After the war ended, a period of reconstruction began.
During the Reconstruction period following the Civil War, federal troops occupied the state of South Carolina as they did in other states in the former Confederacy. This was a time in which African Americans were exploring and enjoying their newly granted freedoms. African American students attended South Carolina College. African American politicians ran for offices in the state legislature, and the state legislature was actually majority African American. Of course, this all came to an end in the 1870s, and federal troops left the state, and white Southerners began to re-implement a system of oppression, most commonly known through Jim Crow segregation.
In the 150 years since the end of the Civil War, South Carolina has seen significant economic development as the population of the state has grown.
Cities like Greenville, that were considered New South cities, had enough economic vitality to rebuild soon after the Civil War. But places like Charleston that didn't held on to their structures for so long. And so the fact that they weren't as strong economically soon after the Civil War has now translated into some of the nation's greatest treasures. And right now, for instance, Charleston South of Broad Residential District is one of the largest historic residential districts in the country.
And along the way, South Carolinians have been a people who have studied their history and put it on display from mountains to sea. Up next on Chronicle, an in-depth look at the tourism industry in South Carolina and what makes our small state such a popular destination.
At Dick Brooks Honda, you've all pre-owned in Greer or Lyman today, where car buying is made easy.
Most people likely would just see us as beach. They wouldn't really know anything other than the beach.
And you couldn't blame them. For years, if you thought about tourism in the Palmetto State, you likely thought about the coast, from the Grand Strand to historic Charleston to the resorts of the Lowcountry.
South Carolina has so many assets. You know, we talk a lot about the coast. So if you go along the coast, we have a diverse coast from Myrtle Beach to Charleston down to Beaufort County and Hilton Head. So everybody has their favorite beach. And around the world, a lot of people's favorite beach is in South Carolina. And that's something that we continue to do well with marketing and have people come visit us and invest their dollars, spend their money here.
And while the beaches are still a draw, over the past 15 years, one corner of the state, better known for its business contributions to the state's economy, has suddenly become a hot tourist stop.
At the time now, our experience was beginning to emerge and evolve, but nobody knew about us. So we knew about it ourselves, but nobody outside of our own community knew about it. So we created a brand, Yeah That Greenville, that's been awesome for us the last 5 years.
Greenville grew with new hotels, restaurants, a performing arts center, and downtown arena. The accolades began to come. Then, some of the final pieces began falling into place. An old concrete vehicle bridge over the Reedy River was demolished. The Liberty Bridge took its place. The River Place development improved the areas along the Reedy River. Fluor Field was built in the West End, bringing professional baseball to the heart of downtown. The Greenville Drive, a farm club of the Boston Red Sox, plays in a stadium that pays homage to the Sox' beloved Fenway Park, with its own version of the Green Monster in left field.
I think the opportunities to get out and explore is so huge for any of us as destinations. We work so hard during the week. Do you have a place that I can get out and cycle? Do you have a place that I can get out and enjoy food and music? Do you have a place that I can get out and do some adventurous hiking? And that is right in our sweet spot.
You know, and I hear more and more folks from outside the state who come here say, you know, I took a trip to Greenville, South Carolina, and you know, we spent a week or half a week in Greenville, South Carolina, basically as tourists.
But South Carolina is so much more. For recreation, the entire Georgia border, from north to south, follows the course of the Savannah River and the lakes that offer a variety of water activities. And this tourism draw is more than just family recreation. Lake Hartwell has hosted the Bassmasters Classic and other fishing tournaments, giving hotels and local restaurants an added boost.
And so in our case, when you're looking at exploring maybe the coast, but now being able to take a look at the mountains that match up for some diversity in your stay, you know, that's where, you know, we really have that to offer. Our beach is the mountains, and so we've got a really wonderful opportunity here that's both urban and mountain related for some great hikes, some really nice sightseeing, and some lake adventures. What's happening is, as we're all elevating our game, that says more and more and more about who we are as people, what we have to offer, and the dynamics of whether you're going to repeat your business or whether you're going to decide to start a business here or move a business here speaks really well for the state as a whole.
You know, tourism is and has always been, with our natural resources, an asset that continue to make South Carolina do well. I mean, about a $20 billion impact on the state when it comes to tourism. When you look at agribusiness, you know, and you roll the timber and forest products into it, you know, they have a claim to make that they're the largest industry in South Carolina. And both those industries, tourism and agribusiness, continue to be kind of that stable platform that we see manufacturing now taking a seat next to them, continue to make South Carolina known around the world for what we do and the quality of life and the natural resources we have to show off.
Still to come on Chronicle, South Carolina from Above, we'll look closer at the impact of agriculture and industry to the state. Up next, from spinning cotton to building jets, the changing face of industry in the Palmetto State.
Are you suffering with chronic?
When you look at South Carolina's standing in the business world, it's all about the people.
So when you look at South Carolina and South Carolina business, it's really based on the tenets that make South Carolina great. It's the people. When you look at the South Carolina workforce, you know, businesses depend on that workforce to make things, to do things. And, you know, from a historical perspective, the work ethic of South Carolinians has been known really throughout the world. You know, and that's one of the basic tenets of South Carolina business in the state.
Tad Pitts of the South Carolina Chamber feels it all started with the state's agrarian roots.
If you look at South Carolina's history from a business perspective, really agriculture and then textiles were the basis for what South Carolina's economic prosperity came from, trade. And if you look today, if you fast forward till today, it's based on the same things.
In many towns, there was a cotton mill, most on the banks of a river or waterway.
The father of Greenville, Vardry McBee, actually introduced mills into this area before the Civil War. And he placed the area's first mills along the falls in downtown Falls Park today and used the water to basically power his textile mills. And so Greenville was economically diversified before the war, and thus we recovered from the Civil War much more quickly than places like Charleston and even some places in the Midlands of South Carolina whose economy was based almost exclusively in agriculture.
With housing, stores, and churches within walking distance, the mill villages grew to take care of workers' needs. In Greenville, mill villages sprung up in a textile crescent on the city's west side. Communities like Dunedin, Monaghan, Poe Mill, Brandon all contributed to Greenville's reputation as the textile capital of the world. As domestic textiles began its decline, business leaders began recruiting more diversified industry. In the 1960s, GE opened its gas turbine plant in Greenville. Beginning in the 1970s, Michelin set up its North American headquarters in Greenville and built several tire manufacturing plants across South Carolina. The 90s saw the arrival of an industry that has been called a game changer. BMW built its first North American manufacturing plant near the Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport in Spartanburg County. Through the years, the plant has expanded numerous times.
So if you look at South Carolina and you look at the kind of the manufacturing renaissance we talked about with a BMW or a Boeing or a Michelin or so many other great manufacturers, and in a lot of cases, some of those manufacturers are international.
Boeing established operations in Charleston County in 2009 when it broke ground for a 787 Dreamliner airplane manufacturing facility. The first completed Dreamliner rolled off the assembly line in 2012, bound for Air India. One of the great assets for South Carolina industry lies just a few miles from the Boeing facility. The South Carolina Ports Authority operates terminals for cargo from Charleston to Georgetown. Among the goods going through these facilities are gas turbines from GE and vehicles from BMW.
You know, you look at BMW, where almost 70% of their vehicles are exported through the Port of Charleston out to other markets. You know, we really do live in a global economy, and I think South Carolina has found its place as one of those cornerstones of that global economy.
The volume of cargo going through these facilities puts the Port of Charleston among the nation's busiest ports.
So South Carolina is a leader in foreign direct investment. So we have a lot of international companies that recognize that South Carolinians are the type of employees and workers that can do what needs to be done to have them prosper. So when you talk about companies like a Michelin, for example, who's been here for decades, you know, you talk to some South Carolinians and you talk about Michelin and they think it's a South Carolina company. They don't know that it's actually a French-based company because the North American headquarters are here in South Carolina. When you talk about BMW and the impact it's had on the upstate with its suppliers and the prosperity that it's spread across a region, you know, it's the model that a lot of other states try to emulate to try to entice foreign direct investment into the state, which ultimately raises the livelihoods and standard of living for all South Carolinians.
On the horizon, Volvo, which expects to produce 100,000 vehicles a year after its first car rolls out in 2018.
When you look at Volvo, who hasn't even finished their first announced plant, has already talked about an expansion. So when you see the sort of impact that has across the region and really to the people's lives in South Carolina, you know, South Carolina is no longer a secret around the world as a place to build and make products, you know, and a lot of those goods actually are for export.
And South Carolina economic development officials continue to announce new and expanding industry in every corner of the state.
When you look at South Carolina, you know, we've obviously been very successful in recruiting manufacturers who have come here for the workforce. But now we've got a state where when you look in different communities around the state, like a Greenville or a Charleston or even a Rock Hill, South Carolina, these are places that people from around the world want to come live and raise their family. So with that sort of draw, I believe you're going to see South Carolina be more successful in recruiting those innovative or R&D type of jobs, which have maybe gone to the Silicon Valley or other places, now may pick Charleston or Greenville or Spartanburg or Anderson County. I mean, when you look at the quality of life and the standard of living that we now have across South Carolina in so many different communities, you know, I believe that the future has South Carolina being a place where you see entrepreneurs bring their businesses not because they need the workforce, but because they want to raise their families in that sort of environment.
And when Chronicle continues, a look at South Carolina's agricultural economy over the last 350 years.
The Rule of Three, the only news helicopter in South Carolina.
From the beginning, there was the soil, the early lifeblood of the South Carolina economy. As the state was settled along the coast by the Europeans, the first crops went into the ground, mainly along the Sea Islands: rice, indigo, cotton, tobacco.
When South Carolina is founded as a colony, one of the first things it does is really timber and cows and things to feed the other colonies and supply other colonies. But as it settles more, we start getting some cash crops like indigo, and Eliza Lucas Pinckney who champions that. But then they start to realize they can grow cotton here. And it's the same time that Britain is going over to India and getting cotton from India, but they have these colonies here that can do it. So we really start noticing a lot of cotton growth in the Sea Islands, and they're making Sea Island cotton, which is a very special cotton.
And as settlers continued to expand across the state, the crop opportunities expanded. In the agricultural structure 2 centuries ago, well-to-do planters were at the top, down to slave labor that kept the large plantations going. In between these two extremes of the farm economy were many smaller farms. All of this contributed to South Carolina being one of the wealthier states on the eve of the Civil War.
Well, one thing I remind all of South Carolinians when I can is that agriculture ties our past to our present and to the future that lies before us. You take the past and realize we've come a long way over the centuries. With most of your larger acreage farms, there was always a crop like cotton or tobacco that had been the mainstays in the 1800s. So as mechanization came forward, it changed things, and as we moved away from some of the farming practices of the early 1800s, crops have come and gone. I mean, cotton enjoyed a great season.
The cotton industry led to an expansion of cotton mills in the late 1800s and early 1900s, which led to work opportunities for many, including some who grew up on small farms.
Agriculture at that time was not really helpful to the average person. There were some large farms, but for the average person who might be doing a share crop, either black or white, the economic outlook was not good. So if a mill comes to town and here you have a promised income, it was really, really a great economic boom for everybody. And cotton mills was a whole lifestyle. It was you could live in that community and never have to leave. You had the store, you had the doctor, you had the school, the whole thing right there. So cotton, especially in the upstate, really helps bring that economic turn, start turning that. And now that because things change and markets change, and now we have different kind of manufacturing coming in to take up that slack.
In the first half of the 20th century, farmers looked for new opportunities. Fruit crops like peaches and apples came, giving South Carolina a new claim to fame.
Back in the early 40s, that's when we first started out. They took the money and he come out of the service, that's how they bought the first peach trees. Now they done cotton, sweet potatoes, whatever it took to make a living, that's what they done. California has the numbers, but we got the taste. And we got beautiful, beautiful peaches that taste good. We fight the weather every year, but when it's all said and done, you know, peaches are still #1. It's our #1 crop, and people like them. And it's the reason we're here.
And while trailing California in peach production, South Carolina farmers will point out they produce more peaches than Georgia, the self-proclaimed peach state.
You know, with agriculture, we talk a lot of numbers. We talk about billions of dollars and thousands of jobs, but really, the true impact of South Carolina agriculture starts with its farmers. 25,000+ that, as commissioner, I have the privilege to work with them, to help them create opportunities, to try to get hurdles out of the way. For the last few years that our agriculture has gone through with floods and hurricanes, I have really seen the resilience that's in the South Carolina farmer. I saw the complete scope of emotions through the flood of 2015, from despair to hope to frustration, you name it. And with a great harvest season like we're having in 2017, it's just great to see that optimism come back into the faces of South Carolina farmers.
And for many of the state's farmers, it's marketing diversification, growing the crops and finding ways to market your crops.
Yeah, we want to become a destination, not just a place along the road. But I think it's hand in hand. I don't think it's about 1, 2, or 3. I think it's about hand in hand. We all work together. You know, if it's a destination or a tour, as long as they're coming, that's what it's all about, making it happen.
James Cooley's Strawberry Hill features that namesake crop in many forms, from fresh fruit to preserves, a restaurant, and a gift shop. This is taking the traditional roadside stand to a new level.
Well, it's in your blood, and I think it goes back to your family. Been blessed to have a wonderful wife, wonderful father, mother, sisters, daughters. You know, they kept all this thing going. It's a family affair for us.
Number one, you have to love what you're doing. You don't become a farmer, invest your life in it, if your heart's not in it. And that's the great thing about working with these men and women who make up South Carolina agriculture. We call it an industry, but it's people.
Up next on Chronicle, South Carolina from Above, the state's influence on the world of sports.
Have you been thinking of
Instagram?
In a state where people have a reputation of working hard, it may be difficult to believe they also find time to play hard. But why not? In South Carolina, the average monthly temperature is above 65 degrees 9 out of 12 months. So the opportunities for outside recreation are endless. It's one of the reasons for the number of golf courses we have that cover the state. The love for baseball in communities far and wide. And then there's football. The whistle of the ref, a siren call that fills high school stadiums on fall Friday nights and college stadiums on Saturdays. With almost 500 public and private courses, it's no wonder that golf is such a draw. From public courses to the most exclusive clubs, there's a place for all. In 1969, the PGA set up residence in the Lowcountry with the establishment of the Heritage Tournament on Hilton Head Island. Arnold Palmer won that first year at Harbor Town. In April, the RBC Heritage will celebrate its 50th tournament. South Carolina has a rich baseball heritage as teams from Little League to professional baseball find a home on fields across the state. Larry Doby of Camden was a groundbreaker as the first African American to play in the American Leagues, following Jackie Robinson's breakthrough with the National League Dodgers in 1947. Doby is a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Another professional baseball player from the upstate is remembered for a stellar career, even though it was cut short by a cheating scandal involving the 1919 World Series. Shoeless Joe Jackson grew up in the Brandon community of Greenville, playing mill ball on a field below the mill. His strong swing and natural ability on the diamond led to a major league career in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and ultimately with the Chicago White Sox. Even though Jackson was accused of joining a conspiracy to throw the World Series, he proclaimed his innocence until his death in 1951. His lifetime batting average of .356 stands as the third highest lifetime average in Major League history. and his supporters point out he led the 1919 series in several statistical categories. But Jackson's ban from baseball continues 98 years after that World Series. Today, in the town he made home, many feel he's a hero, and the city honors Shoeless Joe with a statue outside Fluor Field in downtown. And his former house is a museum just across the street from the stadium. While South Carolinians love their sports in all forms, there's no denying that college sports is right at the top. And among college sports, it's fair to say that football reigns supreme. On fall weekends, Clemson and South Carolina can put more people in their stadiums than live in some of the South Carolina cities, like Greenville or Spartanburg. The big day each year is Rivalry Day, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, when Carolina and Clemson square off. From tailgating to the big game. It's a matchup whose outcome directs how each fan base feels for the next year. From the golf course to horse country, to baseball and soccer fields, to arenas and stadiums. It's the sporting life in the Palmetto State. Just ahead, the beauty of the state from every corner.
Picture yourself floating. Buy one, get one free. Only at Hardee's.
From the coast to the mountains, the state of South Carolina from above is a contrast of colors.
I think the thing that you notice very quickly from the air is the green and the water.
32,000 square miles of islands, beaches, farms, industry, cities, and mountains.
So certainly here in the upstate, to have mountains, to have the kind of greenery that we have, to have the beautiful multiple chain of lakes is such a visual high that really motivates and captures people's imaginations.
If you travel via the state's highways and back roads, you get one perspective of the Palmetto State. But if you want to get an idea of the vast beauty around us, from the rolling hills of the upstate to the coastal plain, you have to go above.
And when you're looking at where do I want to spend my life? Where do I want to put my roots? Who are the kind of people that we'd like to hang out with? You better be looking at us because we're pretty darn good.
Above the comings and goings of life down below.
The beauty of South Carolina directly translates into the quality of life.
A quality of life on display to the world.
South Carolina is such an interesting state. It's incredibly beautiful. We have the foothills, the rolling foothills. We have these amazing waterfalls. We have a beautiful coastline. Tourists come from all around the world to enjoy the assets that we have here. South Carolina is not going to be a well-kept secret much longer.
It's a wonderful state with a wonderful community, and it has always had such a great sense of community. I mean, sometimes we take that into being our own country, but South Carolina is a great community story, and we keep working to make it better. So I always think our outlook is good.
Above, where the sound of the helicopter engine provides the heartbeat of the beauty before you, the beauty of South Carolina from above.
Beautiful South Carolina. Wow.
So we end our tour of South Carolina right where we started, right back here on top of Glassy Mountain. We hope that you've learned some things about South Carolina that you never knew, that you've gone to places that you've never experienced, or that you simply enjoyed the beauty of this aerial tour of the Palmetto State. Thank you for joining us for Chronicle, South Carolina from Above. I'm Jane Robelo. Goodbye.
During these times, it's